Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Unstuck Edit. My name is Gail Chisholm, and welcome. So, today I want to talk about ritual and ceremony because I was at a networking event yesterday and I was sharing what I do, and one half of my business is about being a celebrant and an advocate for celebrating, honouring, marking transitions. Some of that is to do with weddings, funerals, or it might be something that's a bit more avant-garde, like a divorce party or marking or occasion or ritual. And what struck me in the conversation, particularly when it came to the funeral side of thing, was around this sort of decline in ceremony, particularly in the death space, around ending, or I suppose death, but also other things ending. So we're still very comfortable in the celebratory space around weddings or naming ceremonies. But perhaps when it comes to endings, there's maybe a shying away from the emotion. I've witnessed that in my own family around trying to protect people, and so saying in their will that they don't want to have a funeral and they would rather just have the tea and sandwiches after. And I was reminding them that actually the purpose of the funeral is actually for the people who are in attendance, and it is actually supporting them in their grief, and that the way that the ceremony is structured actually supports. It's almost like a crescendo where the emotions working up to this point of whether it's like the committal, I suppose, that, in the crematorium when the curtains close or you're lowering the coffin into the ground. And that committal is like a big exhale for everybody that's there. And almost like, there's been the grieving process is supported with the funeral planning and talking about the loved one, etc. But then after that, it's a marking, and like there's something that's psychological that helps humans with this whole marking of occasions or rituals and honouring change. And so it got me thinking, because one of the people was like, oh, I hadn't really thought about it like that. And I was saying that, sometimes we think, in trying to protect people from feeling emotions is actually what we're doing is suppressing emotions, when actually ceremony and ritual can really help and support us move through change. So it got me on like thinking after the whole day. And actually in the end, I ended up having a meeting in the afternoon talking about setting up locally a bereavement cafe, but also something that's, I suppose, under the umbrella of a death cafe, or, it's somewhere where you can come and talk about everything to do with a life ending. And that doesn't mean to say that you're facing death. It could be that, you're just curious, and everything from practical stuff like will planning and things, to thinking about your funeral, to beliefs and values, like what do you think happens when you're dead, and just to bring people together to have a conversation, because I'm such an advocate of the more we talk about things as well, the less frightening or scary that they can be, and maybe easier to face. And I don't know if I said this on here, whether it was on the pod I do with Sandra, but your body knows what to do when it comes to the end, because it's part of how we are built in our makeup, in the same way as our body knows how to function day to day, it knows how to breathe, we don't have to think about it, or a woman having a baby, etc. So I've been mulling over the ceremony side of my business a lot more since that networking event yesterday, and I thought it would be a really good topic to discuss today, particularly the world in which we live in today. Like everything feels so instant, even things like, I was watching a TikTok yesterday about a guy, Justin, what's his name? Justin Schumann, I think. And he just basically is like, I am me, I do long form content, I yap on camera, and I'm not going to change that into 10-second sound bites for people. And I thought, it's so true. Like, everything's so instant. We can access so much stuff immediately on our phone. We can have things delivered to our door in a heartbeat. And, actually, weirdly, my word for this month is patience. Especially when it comes to business and building things up, having some patience and nurturing and growing and taking pleasure in the slow progress and not seeing it as a negative. But, we just have this attitude. It's not even an attitude. Maybe it's just a thing now with like technology, that modern life teaches us that we can just move on quickly. Whereas historically, our ancestors, and not even our ancient ancestors, like modern ancestry, they would lean on ceremony and ritual to invite us to pause, just like long enough for our psyche, our heart, our emotions, our connections to just catch up with our lives. And so, because I was off on a little, I was a tangent. It's not even a tangent. What's the word I'm looking for? This is my menopause brain kicking in. Anyway, I was doing some digging around on the internet, and I discovered an article with somebody interviewing an author I've never heard of before, a guy called Bruce Feiler. And he wrote a book called A Time to Gather, How Ritual Created the World and How It Can Save Us. Now, I think it's this year it's come out. Obviously, that's going on my reading list. However, I was reading this interview with him, and his whole premise of this book is all around like when life changes, humans have always gathered. So we are community-based species. We're there to support people. And in his book, he's gone across countries of the world. I think he's about 16 countries. And he argues that ritual gatherings are one of humanity's oldest technologies for connection, belonging, and navigating change. And I was like, this man is on my wavelength. Now, I haven't written a book, but I agree with that principle. So if you're not sure about this, let's have a think, right? How many of your life transitions have you actually marked rather than maybe just survive through or move through? Now, that might be, so for example, like a diagnosis. So when I had a cancer diagnosis, I didn't mark that, but what I did do is actually when I had, obviously it was a bit weird to celebrate, what I did do though, I did lean on quite a lot of rituals. I'll come on and talk a bit about the difference between a ritual and a ceremony in a little bit. But when I had my ovaries removed as part of my ongoing treatment plan for one reason or another, and before I had the operation, I wrote a poem called The Ode to My Ovaries, and that was me marking this change and this transition. Divorce. I am divorced, and I did mark that in several different ways. Menopause. Now, this is a big one where, and it could even be, so we used to mark it's like the coming of age of like a woman starting her periods. But did you do that if you are a woman watching? If you are in menopause, have you marked that occasion and that transition into menopause and what that marks and the wisdom that it's bringing and the new chapter that it's opening, and remembering and celebrating the previous chapter, empty nesting, when your kids have left home? Like, that's a big change. Having children, big change. Redundancy, retirement, end of a friendship, not just the kind of end of relationships, but what about ends of friendships, or moving to a different location? There's grief in all of these types of endings. Or even things like celebrating successes, like you might have stopped smoking, or like cut out sugar or cut out alcohol, or you might be celebrating a business, or You might be feeling just connected to your body. And, you know, it's like the more that we can tune into these changes and transitions, the easier it is for our nervous system to connect to the transition and to support us through it. We don't just wake up one morning and be like, hey, I'm the new version of me. So let's dig into a little bit on what is a ceremony versus what is a ritual. They can be used interchangeably, and that's cool if that's what you do. But a ritual is more of like a repeated intentional practice, and it can create meaning through that repetition, and it can be personal. So you could just have your own personal rituals, or it can be communal, easier said for me to say. And it often can support more of like that everyday regulation and connection. So even if you think of like when you make your morning brew, you might have a little ritual of how you make your cup of tea. Tea bags in first, or milk, or whatever, however you do it, or like if you put in some sugar, or like how you particularly stir it. And do you stir in intention? And then do you create time? Is your morning brew your sacred moment just for you? You have created a ritual out of something that you do every day. It may also be things like a journaling. Maybe you have a non-negotiable point in the day where you journal, or you pull oracle cards, or maybe you light some incense, or you light a candle, or it could be things like a regular family dinner, or a regular date night, or a gratitude practice, or how you like brush your hair. Like if you're online, you could watch, there's a lady called the Glasgow Witch, and she talks about the rituals and even things like how you know, brushing your hair, or washing your face, or washing your body, or applying lotion. You know, a lot of it's then when we start to become more intentional in these things, and it can create a rhythm and a sense of safety for your body, a sense of you belong, and you're safe. Ceremonies, on the other hand, one of the things that is slightly different is it is often, it is marking, it's a deliberate marking of a transition, or it is a threshold between one identity and another, and it tends to happen at once or at significant moments. So the classics, you've got a wedding. It is the ceremony is the joining of the two people, and you're crossing a threshold of coming into something alone and leaving with a partnership. Funerals, threshold of not being here anymore. Naming ceremonies, divorce ceremonies, graduation. You could also be thinking around creating ceremony on things that are maybe a little bit smaller and more. So one of the primary differences tends to be ceremonies tend to have more people around it, but it doesn't actually have to be like that. You can then create ceremony onto your rituals. So, for example, you might have a ritual of, you might write a letter to past versions, endings of things, relationships, old bosses, whatever. Adding ceremony to it could be the burning of that once you feel that you've released whatever it is, or it could be like in some places like the ringing of a bell after the end of a cancer treatment, or ceremony could be some people might be like, you know, walking into the sea after like a divorce, or, you know, something, or a bungee jump, I don't know, something like that. That's where it's kind of like, it tends to be a single moment. And sometimes, you know, it's really saying something has ended and something else is beginning. It is, you know, that transition. So why would even this matter? Well, in the interview with Bruce Feiler, one of the things he was talking about is that, you know, humans have been gathering for millennia to mark moments of pain, confusion, change, but yet our modern society has quietly let some of these things just drift, and they've moved out of our consciousness. And instead, you know, modern life is keep busy, scroll, distract, return to work, don't take time for yourself, stay positive, without necessarily fully acknowledging what has maybe happened. You know, and I think, excuse me, you know, this rituals isn't just about like woo woo. Research does suggest that it can actually reduce anxiety because, you know, predictable actions can help calm uncertainty. So like when life feels chaotic, the ritual provides the structure. So let's think about, you know, going back to the morning brew example. I know myself, like I love a slow morning, and being able to lean into that ritual for me of, you know, I've made my brew, my coffee, it's brewing, I have my cereal, and then, you know, I sit and I have cuddles with my dog. And that gives me, weirdly, I feel that when I'm able to do that, I set my day up better for success. But it's something that I will always come back to. It's like having a hug. When we are doing these things and regulating the nervous system, that's going to help things. So the signs would be like you can slow your breathing. You can also do things like repetition, like singing and movement can be part of like your ritual, and it can help shift your mood and your perspective and where you're at. The more that we can actually start to introduce rituals and ceremony back into our life, is it also will help build community and increase connections. And I think that's something for me that I know that I've been craving much more human connection again. You know, the pandemic really kind of isolated us all, and I certainly am wanting to do more face to face. I'm so entirely grateful for technology because it does allow me to work really freely and flexibly and do things like this, and hopefully reach people that I might never reach who live in my community. But there's just something so magical when people are brought together, and there's ritual and ceremony in it. It feels like so calming. I'm trying to sort of reach for the words and I think this is some of the thing that why maybe we've lost some of the ritual and ceremony is because it isn't necessarily easily articulated, and that actually it's much more of that feeling, you know. And I think in part of the research I was doing for this video and podcast today, it was saying that, you know, psychologists do find that people cope better with adversity if they can create meaning from the experience. And I know certainly from going through cancer, divorce, job changes, that I have lent so heavily on things that would be in the ritual bucket, not just my morning brew that I've talked about, but things like journaling or like my Kundalini practice or meditation, and or like my walks with the dog, getting out in nature, connecting to nature. These things that there's intention, and it's conscious intention, and also that kind of marking in the ending of the chapters. And I'm really fortunate that I haven't experienced, both my parents are here, haven't experienced some of the grief that I witness and I support people through in terms of losing a loved one. But I've been through a lot of grief in my life around changes, endings of chapters, new beginnings, and how we transition and move through that. Ceremony and ritual has really supported me. Obviously I'm an advocate for it, but interestingly, you know, I realised that I was creating rituals in my life, and then when I started studying to become a celebrant. And I prefer the word ceremonialist, to be frank, because I love it if somebody asks me to kind of help curate a ceremony that is less conventional and honours something and supports a transition and a new beginning of a chapter, because it's just magical. So what rituals can you integrate into your life that could support with whatever is going on with you just now? And, you know, even if that is like I'm just not feeling, I just like of loss of identity. I look in the mirror, I'm like, I don't really know who I am anymore. Or a sense that there's a dissatisfaction, but you don't have necessarily clarity on what's next. The rituals can help you get to a point of acceptance of where you're at. It can help you get clear on where you might want to go next. And that doesn't have to mean like clear on the big plan. It could even just be clarity on a small step that you can take. It can help create the motivation for you to take action. You can lean on them at times where maybe things aren't going swimmingly well. So what makes a good ritual? Let me give you some tips. So according to Bruce Feiler, and to be fair, I would actually agree with them, especially when you're creating an intentional ritual. Like if you've decided you want to introduce something new, having 3 parts to it will help you. So you want to think about the beginning, and that creates the sense of arrival. So this also brings in the intentionality to the ritual. So it's a conscious act. You can think about it being crossing a threshold. And that's the crossing of the threshold. That sounds quite grand, but even that might mean, so today I have a little ritual. Most days is I will light some incense and I'll pull an oracle card. I'll pull a truth bomb. I might sit with a crystal, I might not, but the fundamentals of that are there. And the minute I light the incense, or if it's a candle, I'm crossing the threshold into my work context. Or what, this room is the space that I work. It's the space I create. It's the space that I try and figure shit out to do with my life. It's where I record this beautiful thing. And when I create that, so I have crossed the threshold from my morning brew, which is more slower, tuning into my body, how am I feeling, and the incense is the thing that kind of helps me cross that threshold. You can do things like, you might not be able to do any of those. And so even just simply standing, grounding in, and when we talk about grounding in, that means like feel the earth beneath you. And that might be just you're standing, but just, if you're standing, you just take your attention to your feet, to the earth, and you can imagine like you're sending roots down into the earth. So you're standing there really strong and grounded in a connection to Mother Nature, and just even taking 3 deep breaths. Now you could do that at a bus stop. Like you don't have to be like crazy mofo where you're like standing and be like, I'm taking deep breaths. You can just do that, and you can just like, it's centering yourself. It's bringing intention into what you're doing. And so you are consciously moving from the previous state into this state of you're creating a ritual around something. You can play music as well, and it's just that change. Then you have your middle part, and so this is where you might name the tension, and that's not about fixing, it's just acknowledging. And then you might want to create an activity that allows people to participate. Now, as I mentioned, rituals can be by yourself or you can be with other people. So this might be more of like where you're creating a group setting. So it might be you are holding a circle. Let's say it's not the bereavement. Let's say it's for like it's divorce, post-divorce, and you want to create a ritual around that. So in order to bring people's consciousness and presence into the space, we have the beginning. That might be, there's some music, you might do some drumming, you might do some breath work, you might do some movement. You're just like getting people to cross from where they were into the space that they are in to participate. And then you might then say, it's the opening of it where you're saying, we're here today to talk about divorce and how it might have impacted us. We're not here to fix anything. We're here to listen. We don't judge. We don't comment. We ask we can, if we have something to say, we ask a question if we can share it, so we seek permission. So you're setting boundaries around it. And then it could be that this is a circle which is sharing stories. It might be a circle which is silent and people write things down. Or it could be that it's somewhere where you just sit and you maybe sit in meditation. Or a good one sometimes, especially if you're dealing with where you want to release something, is like you can hold an object like stone or something, and it's almost like you're visualizing an extraction and it's given to the stone, and then like part of it, I would say almost like the ceremony part at the end would be the delivery of the stone into the middle, where it's like, you know, there's the ceremony of that. The ritual piece might be the sitting holding the stone. And then once you've done the middle piece, there's an ending. And because again, you want to close off that ritual space and allow people to then go on. And I would say rituals would always tend to end with hope, because what is the point of the ritual? It is to support us in being human. You might want to people to carry something away. They might leave with a blessing, an object, an intention, an affirmation, a tool. And rituals aren't about erasing any difficulty. That's not what we're here. It's not about bypassing, but it's about, often, especially when we do it together with other humans, it reminds us that we don't have to carry things alone. So yeah, that's probably a nice little trick you can do if you want to create ritual. You might also want to explore what are your daily habits and how can you ritualize those and bring intention, and even use them as tools to come back to yourself, to ground yourself down, regulate your nervous system, support you with your intentions and where you want to go in life. And that might be, say, like using affirmation, or some people might like even things like EFT, which is the tap in. That can be a nice ritual. So what, maybe like a nice question to leave yourself with as well, might be thinking about ceremony and ritual in the sense of what events or things in your life can you use ritual and ceremony to help you transition. And it might not even be something that is current. The ritual and ceremony are tools that you can use to release things from the past. So old stories, old beliefs. You can use rituals like journaling or the tapping that I've mentioned, or breathwork or movement to release old things. It doesn't have to be something that you're going through today. Maybe in the past you've been through a divorce. Maybe you've had a redundancy, or a demotion, or restructuring in your career, or, you know, you might have had like grief or trauma, like small t trauma. Ritual and ceremony are tools that you can use to work on those things as well. Equally, maybe this is an opportunity to think about what's coming up for you, and would incorporate in a ritual and or a ceremony help celebrate you and what you're doing, and helping shift your identity. And, you know, this is the beauty about these things, and why our ancestors, I think, really leaned on them so heavily, is they can be really personal. You can create ritual and ceremony for whatever you like. And I think it's also, there's the beauty and the creativity of coming up for something for yourself. So I'll maybe leave you with a few suggestions on ceremonies or rituals that you can maybe try. Write in a letter to a previous version of yourself, and you might want to hone in on maybe a specific thing. Like for me, even now, I still can visualize receiving that cancer diagnosis, or sitting down for when my ex-husband and I decided that no, that's it, over. We were actually out for dinner. So maybe I would write to a past version of myself. I would then I like burning things because I feel that once you've written it, it gets it out. And then I think the burning really is a beautiful visual representation of a release. Obviously, safe, do it safely. You could also write, it doesn't have to be a letter, you could write down beliefs that are holding you back, expectations you've been placing on yourself, or expectations you've been feeling from others, and write them down and burn them. Things like walking into the sea, or like the stone thing that I was talking about, like you could just sit and take a stone and put it somewhere. You could create something where you invite your nearest and dearest round to witness a new beginning. I actually did it was a living wake for a friend of mine, and she wasn't dying, but she wanted to really mark the ending. She was turning 40, and she wanted to leave behind and shed a past version of herself. And it was kind of like we had like basically like a funeral for this past version, and we shrouded her, and it was so beautiful, like really imaginative, and it was such an honour to be able to hold that space and curate it. Even things like kitchen discos are ritualistic, especially if you think about what you're dancing out to maybe celebrate or release. And even things like you might start to create a ritual of buying yourself flowers on an anniversary of something, or it might even be once a week, who knows. So maybe have a think about what chapter of your life is asking to be acknowledged rather than rushed through. What part of yourself is needing to be thanked before you let it go. And, what would change if you believed you deserved a ceremony instead of just simply coping? And then, the last one, what if getting unstuck isn't about pushing harder, but about pausing long enough to honour the threshold that you are already standing on? So, I'll leave you maybe with a final thought from the article I was reading about Bruce Feiler's book. And really what I try and do here in the Unstuck edit is, transformation rarely arrives with fireworks. It's often in the quieter spaces, more slowly, but it's asking to be witnessed. And so maybe even the simplest thing that you could do today is to tell yourself, I see what happened, I honour who I was, and I'm ready to meet who I'm becoming. Thank you for being here. I hope you've enjoyed today. Please share with me any rituals and ceremonies that you've been to, or things that you enjoy, what you do, things that have lasted and stayed with you. I am a collector of stories and ceremonies and rituals, so I just love hearing about them. So please, please, please feel free to leave it in the comments, and hopefully I'll see you again next time. Thanks for being here. Bye.